Hello. Thank you so much, Brenda. So, happy to be back here. I was here last year to do a talk, and it was really wonderful. You're a great group of people. So, I'm excited to be here in February because it's Heart Month, so it's a great time to really get into that heart-healthy eating and talking about what the risks are for heart disease and some of the steps we can take to try and prevent those things from happening. Because heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. It affects a lot of people. So heart disease is kind of a vague term. It does include a lot of different conditions and diseases. So there are things that can affect your blood vessels, so things like coronary artery disease. We have heart rhythm problems if your heart's beating too fast, too slow, or irregularly. There's also disease of the heart valve, so that's stenosis, or the narrowing of those valves. Those can all affect our health in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different factors that can contribute to those kinds of issues and affect the heart as well. Obviously, of course, we're talking about eating and nutrition and the steps we can take with food choices to try and help prevent some of those things. So, as far as the role of nutrition goes, we want to try and achieve favorable cholesterol levels. So that's going to include your LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. We're also going to talk about blood pressure a little bit. So as far as total cholesterol goes, the goal is to be about 200 or less. With the LDL, that's the bad cholesterol. So LDL, L is low. That's what we want to be lower. You want that to be less than 100. As far as food choices go, saturated fat is what's going to contribute most to that. And that LDL cholesterol is what contributes to the plaque in arteries and can cause some of those arterial issues. With the HDL, that's the good cholesterol. That's the one we want to be a little bit higher, so H high. The reason is it helps to kind of reduce that LDL from blocking our arteries. So you want to try and get that one as high as you can. Ideally, at least 40. Even higher would be better, maybe even around 60 to be more protective. For food choices, those omega-3 fatty acids are going to be a big contributor with that. Triglycerides are a type of fat in the blood. We want that to be less than 150. So that's going to be affected by alcohol, refined carbohydrates, simple sugars, also lack of physical activity. Across the board, lack of physical activity will kind of worsen these things. So if you're not exercising enough, it can make your HDL a little too low, or your LDL and triglycerides a little too high. Blood pressure is pretty rampant. It affects 1 in 3 American adults, which is a lot. And what's most scary about that is it tends to be asymptomatic, so people don't realize they have it. And it's the most modifiable risk factor, so it's the easiest to kind of control if you can catch it. So making sure you go into your doctors regularly, get these kinds of things checked is a great precursor to make sure that you're staying on top of what you need to be handling. The issue with blood pressure is that it can, over time, damage your heart and your arteries and your valves and all that. It can lead to heart attacks, heart failure, strokes. It can also affect your kidneys. So long-term uncontrolled hypertension can have a lot of detrimental effects on the body. Salt and sodium are going to be one of the biggest contributors to high blood pressure, but alcohol, body weight, and again, that lack of physical activity are also going to contribute. So our overall goal with nutrition is always to prevent disease, to keep these things from happening in the first place. If it has already happened, if something is already kind of plaguing you right now, the idea is to manage it, keep it from getting worse, and try to keep it from affecting your quality of life. Keeping those symptoms at bay and making sure you feel as best as you can. Inflammation is a word that's going to come up a lot. I'm sure you've heard it. It's kind of a buzzword. It's all over the place. So inflammation is our body's reaction to any kind of stressors, infections, diseases, things like that. So heart disease is an inflammatory disease. Same with diabetes. So you do want to make sure you're choosing foods that will help to reduce that inflammation to kind of keep things from getting out of control. Unfortunately, a lot of foods in our typical American diet do promote inflammation. So that's going to be those saturated fats, refined sugars, refined carbohydrates, excessive alcohol, fried foods, just to name a few. So those are the kinds of things you want to try and cut back on. And we're going to go into more detail about the foods you want to add in. So this is a picture called My Plate. Is anyone familiar with this? So this is what replaced the food pyramid. I like it because I think it's just more user-friendly. It makes a little bit more sense. If you remember the food pyramid, grains were on the bottom. What does that mean? How much can I eat? This kind of gives you a better idea of portion sizes. So there's 5 different food groups here. We have grains, fruits, vegetables, protein, and dairy. All of them are important. Each food group has different nutrients our body needs to really function at its best. So balanced eating is really important. I tell people to have at least 3 food groups per meal, just to make sure you're getting that variety. If you can get all 5, even better, but try to have at least 3. And I'm going to go more specifically into each of these food groups as we go along. So first we're going to talk about the grains and the starches. So up there in the corner you can see it's that quarter of the plate, that orange part. Obviously whole grains are going to be the better choice because they're naturally higher in fiber and a little bit less processed. The slogan is make half your grains whole. So throughout the course of the day, of all the grains and starches that you're eating, try to make at least half of them whole grain. To make sure you're eating a whole grain food, you want to check the ingredient list. Just because something's brown doesn't necessarily mean it is a whole grain. Sometimes food companies can get pretty tricky with that. So you want that first ingredient on the label to say whole grain and whatever type of flour it is. So whole grain beef flour would be a good choice. Those kinds of foods are going to have at least 2 grams of fiber per serving, ideally more like 4 or 5. That's how you know it's a good choice. Fiber is important for a lot of things. It is anti-inflammatory, it kind of keeps everything moving, keeps everything regular, a lot of benefits to it. So by choosing those whole grain foods, you're going to increase your fiber consumption. The goal for women is about 25 grams a day. For men, it's more like 35, 38 grams a day. There's 2 different kinds of fiber. There's soluble and insoluble. Both are important. Insoluble fiber is going to be like your bran, kind of pushes everything through the system. Soluble fiber attracts water to the bowels. So you want to get a good mix of both, but you want to remember to also increase your fluid intake as you increase your fiber intake. So in order for that soluble fiber to do its job, it needs that water there too. If you were to take in too much fiber and not enough water, it can cause some issues. Also, increasing your fiber too quickly can cause either diarrhea or constipation. Could go either way. So typically, if that's something you want to start with, about 5 grams every couple of days is a safe way to increase it. Okay? Starchy vegetables are included in this section, so potatoes, corn, peas. Still fine to eat, great source of fiber, lots of nutrients. We just want to make sure that they're in that quarter of the plate and not on the vegetable side. Okay? For any diabetics, they will affect your blood sugars a little bit more. So portion size is going to be important with those. But like I said, still an important part of a healthy diet. Anytime you're not sure about anything, you can always look at a nutrition label. Check the serving size on those kinds of foods. We'll talk more about label reading. With carbohydrates, for diabetics, a serving is 15 grams of carbohydrate. That would be 1 carb choice. And typically you can have 45 to 60 grams per meal. Okay. I know right now this food group is kind of getting a bad name. Everyone's kind of anti-carbohydrate, but they're really important. So don't feel like you can't eat these foods. You absolutely can and you should. They're actually your brain's main source of energy. So like I said, it's the whole grains that are the good ones. You want to make sure you're choosing more of those. Trying to cut back on the refined stuff and the sugars is a great way to transition to a more healthy diet. So next up we've got fruits and vegetables, which I lumped into one category. So combined they make up half the plate there. You want to make sure you're getting a variety of colors because different colors have different nutrients. So fruits and vegetables have a lot of different antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, all kinds of stuff, so the more variety you're eating, the better. Also, the darker and deeper the color, the more nutritional value they'll have. However you like to eat them, as long as you're eating them, I'm happy. Fresh, frozen, canned, whatever it is, whatever you prefer, whatever fits into your lifestyle and your budget, that's totally fine. They all have a great source of nutrients. So if you can, afford fresh, organic, if that's what you prefer, that's totally fine. If it doesn't fit into your budget, if you don't really care, that's fine too. Canned, just want to make sure you watch out for sodium. So make sure you're finding the no salt added versions. You can also always rinse them off on a colander before you prepare them, just to make sure some of that residual sodium is gone. With canned fruits, it's the sugar you want to watch out for. So if it's canned in water or its own juices, that's good. We want to stay away from the syrups, even the light syrups, that's got a lot of added sugars. Okay. The recommendation is 2 servings of fruit per day, 3 servings of vegetables per day. 1 serving would be 1 cup of raw vegetables or a half cup of cooked vegetables or fruit. Okay, so one of the benefits to increasing this is that we're also going to be increasing fiber, which we were just talking about with the greens. So the fiber that's anti-inflammatory, the sugars that we were talking about reducing are pro-inflammatory. So by choosing more of those complex carbohydrates, you're reducing your refined sugars and it kind of balances out that inflammation process. Moving along to protein, leaner protein options are going to be a little bit better just because Most of your animal foods, so we'll get to dairy as well, but protein are going to be your biggest contributor of saturated fat, which, as I mentioned, is the one that increases that LDL cholesterol. Okay? So by choosing lower fat protein options, you're going to be reducing that saturated fat composition. So chicken and turkey are better choices. Fish is also excellent, especially things like salmon, tuna, herring. Those are much higher in those heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids, which raise the HDL cholesterol. The recommendation is fish like twice a week, which is fine, however you like to do it. If you don't like fish, you don't have to eat it, but it does have some benefits if it's something that you're interested in. There's also a lot of plant-based protein options out there, so nuts, seeds, legumes, things like that. The benefit to choosing plant-based proteins is they're even lower in saturated fat than that chicken and turkey. So I have a picture here that shows you a cup of black beans has about 18 grams of protein, which is just about the same as a serving of chicken, 3-ounce serving of chicken. Lentils, same thing, a cup has about 18 grams of protein. And again, those beans, the legumes, they kind of fit into a lot of different categories. So they've got some fiber, they've got some carbohydrate, they've got some protein. There are a lot of meat-free products out there now, things like the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger, all of those soy-based things. Those are fine, just keep in mind that because they are processed, they tend to have a little bit more sodium in them. So you still want to be reading those nutrition labels. If that's something you want to transition to, that's fine. Just pay attention to the sodium and also the fat. I believe it's the Impossible Burger. It still has a comparable amount of fat to that. The beef burger is about 20 grams, and they use coconut oil in that one, which is a saturated fat. So comparatively, they're kind of similar. The Impossible Burger is a little bit better because it doesn't use the coconut oil, it uses more unsaturated fats. So it still has a high fat content, so depending on what else you're eating throughout the day, you can fit that into your diet. But the nuts, seeds, legumes are undoubtedly a good choice. As far as food preparation goes, you do want to try and stay away from the fried foods. Obviously, that's going to be higher in fat. Typically, things are fried in fats that aren't so good for our hearts because olive oil can't be cooked at a high temperature. So we'll move ahead to dairy. So same idea with the dairy as the protein. You want to choose the lower fat options because, again, this is going to be a bigger contributor to that saturated fat. So 1% or skim for your milks, yogurts, and cheeses. There are a lot of non-dairy options out there now. So we've got soy milk, we've got cashew milk, we've got almond milk, there's all kinds, pea milk. Whatever you prefer is fine. Just keep in mind that those dairy alternatives, most of them don't have quite as much protein as your regular dairy milk. So if that's what you're using it for as a protein source, just keep that in mind. The Ripple, has anybody heard of Ripple? It's milk made from pea protein. That one actually is comparable in protein to regular dairy milk. And it tastes pretty good. The thing you want to watch out for with dairy is added sugars. So if you are choosing those non-dairy milks, make sure you're choosing the unsweetened kinds because those vanilla and chocolate have a lot of extra sugars in them. Same with yogurts. So typically you're better off choosing a plain version of yogurt and you can put your own fruit and stuff into it to flavor it. That way you're in control of what's going into it because those pre-flavored ones tend to be very high in sugar. Sodium goes for like those cheeses. So cheese is a big contributor to sodium. Some are better than others, so typically ricotta, parmesan, mozzarella, those are naturally a little bit lower in sodium. You still want to watch the portion size, but those are fine. It's more of the American cheese that you want to try and stay away from. Swiss would be a better alternative. Any kind of deli meats or deli cheeses. The benefit to buying something like a boar's head is they have their nutrition facts available. So if you're ever not sure, they have a little packet usually right on the deli counter, but it's also available online. You can take a look at all of their products, see what the serving size is, and see what the total sodium content is in those foods. It's very surprising. They do have a lot of low sodium options, so keep that in mind if that's something that you do like to eat, that's fine. To go back to the protein option, even some of those low sodium hams are still quite high, so I'd say stick with the chicken and turkey there as well. So on to label reading. Has anybody noticed these new nutrition labels yet? This is the new one. So bigger companies were required to implement this as of January this year. So January 2020, this is what those larger food companies are showing now compared to the old one. What's the first thing you notice on there? The calories. So they have made serving size and calories much larger and in bold. That's where you want to start looking when you look at these nutrition labels. A lot of times the serving size is not the same as the amount we're actually eating. That's why you want to start there. Sometimes we eat twice the serving size. In that case, you'd have to double everything else on here to get a better idea of what you're actually taking in. With certain foods, that's fine, but with others, maybe not such a good choice. So always check the serving size first to kind of get an idea of how much you can actually take in. Anything you want to limit, so saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, you want those things to be about 5% or less of your daily value, so on this side of the label. Okay? It's a nice, easy number to remember when you're in the grocery store. It's a good way to compare brands and also determine if something is ultimately a good choice or not. If it's a little bit more than 5%, it's probably fine. But that's just a nice, even number that I like to keep in my head when you remember no matter what. We talked about fiber, so those grain foods should have at least 2 grams of fiber per serving, ideally more like 4 or 5. Another new component to this label is it now has added sugars, not just total sugars. So the difference there would be if a food had fruit in it, that would be included in the total sugars, whereas adding in high fructose corn syrup or something like that would be the added sugars. It's okay to have some added sugars throughout the day, but like I said, it does contribute to inflammation. So there is a restriction. Generally, we want women to have 25 grams or less per day. With men, it's more like 32 grams or less. So it's okay to indulge in little things, pick and choose stuff, but you don't want to go too far over that amount. Another new thing you'll notice is the vitamins. So on the old label, we had vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron. This new one has vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. The reason is Americans didn't really have a problem getting vitamin A and vitamin C, so they kind of took those off because it's not as important if we're already getting what we need from that. But vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium are nutrients where we're kind of lacking a little bit. We're not eating the foods that are giving us the right amount that we need for our bodies to really function at their best. So being aware of those things is important. Potassium is also especially important for anyone who happens to be on a diuretic. Sometimes that can deplete your potassium, or for people with kidney problems who need to limit their potassium. So very exciting advancements in the nutrition world. So sodium keeps coming up. It came up a lot with the cheeses, with the grain foods, all that kind of stuff. The recommendation for the average person is 2,300 milligrams per day, maximum. Does anybody know how many milligrams of sodium are in 1 teaspoon of salt? It's 2,300. Isn't that crazy? In 1 teaspoon. So if you're adding salt to your foods that already probably have some sodium in them to begin with, you're already over that restriction. Isn't that wild? Yeah. For someone who needs to be on a sodium restriction, so if you have hypertension or any other kind of heart conditions, it's more like 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams per day, which is pretty low if you are a salt user. So stepping away from the salt shaker is a good first step, and that's not specific to just table salt, it's all salt. Himalayan sea salt, kosher salt, all of those, they're all very comparable as far as the sodium content goes. Oh, so 90% of Americans exceed the daily recommendation is what my number was. It is tough if you're choosing processed foods, any kind of packaged foods, which is convenient, I get it. I fall victim to it too. So that's where the label reading comes in handy because there are some better options out there. With the saturated fat, the general recommendation is it should be less than 10% of your total calories per day. So that word calories, again, is kind of hard because it has to be specific to the number of calories you're eating per day. Let's say you eat 2,000 calories a day, they work out to about 20 grams of fat total, of saturated fat. Trans fat is something that you should not only try to limit, but try to avoid. That's really the only thing I'll ever tell you not to ever eat. Reason being, it raises the bad LDL cholesterol and it also lowers the good HDL cholesterol. It's a double whammy. You want to stay away from those. This is another place where those food companies get tricky. If it has less than 0.5 grams of trans fat, they don't have to put it on the number section of the label. But if you look at the ingredients and you see the word hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, that's a trans fat. So if you see that on a label, put that food back in the oven. Typically it's going to be found in processed baked goods is a big one. I've also seen it in peanut butter, tortillas, things you wouldn't always expect. So especially at first when you're going through the grocery store, it's going to take you a little bit longer. You're going to be reading a lot of labels. But once you kind of get the hang of it, you'll be able to pick out which brands are better choices, and it gets easier and faster. Any questions on that? Okay. So next up, things to limit is added sugars. I mentioned already the restrictions there. We want women to have 25 grams or less per day. For men, it's more like 32 grams or less per day. There's a lot of different words for added sugars out there. I listed some of them here. So basically anything ending in OSE is going to be a sugar. So glucose, fructose, sucrose, anything like that is a sugar. To name out a couple others, of course, high fructose corn syrup is a big one, malt sugar, raw sugar, molasses, things like that, but also honey. Honey and agave are naturally occurring, but they're not naturally found in foods, so they're still an added sugar. If that's something that you prefer, if you swapped out using sugar in your coffee, you're now using honey, that's okay. You just want to pay attention to how much of it you're using. The benefit to those choices, the honey and the agave, is they're naturally a little bit sweeter than table sugar, so it's possible you could use a little bit less of it, but just still pay attention to how much you're using throughout the day. So we've talked about the things we want to limit and stay away from. Next up, I've got some things to try and add into your diet. So I keep talking about reducing your saturated fat content because it's more heart healthy that way. As you're cutting back on your saturated fats, you should try and add in more unsaturated fats, particularly those omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in olive oil, almonds, walnuts, avocados, salmon, tuna, all those foods. They have a lot more of those omega-3 fatty acids, which raise the HDL cholesterol, which ultimately will help to control the LDL cholesterol. Fiber, we talked about also, adding it in, all the benefits associated with that. And as you increase your fiber, you want to also increase your fluid intake. So as far as water goes, the recommendation is like 64 ounces per day. So that's another one of those things that'll kind of vary from person to person. It is a good standard. It could be 8-ounce glasses. Like I said before, progress is good. For any of these things that seem overwhelming to you, you only have to pay out a couple to work on right now and just work on improving it. So if you typically drink, let's say, 3 cups of water a day, try to make it 4. That increase it a little bit more. It gets easier with time that way. You don't have to completely change everything that you're doing by tomorrow. That would be really hard to do and also really hard to maintain. And our goal is a lifelong lifestyle change. So for some inspiration, I know it's very helpful to have recipes and things like that. The Mediterranean diet was voted the healthiest diet. It includes a lot of plant-based proteins, a lot of fish, omega-3 fatty acids, and it's overall very heart healthy. A close second was the DASH diet. So that's dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So it focuses on low sodium, also more plant-based, lots of fruits and vegetables, and overall very heart healthy. A third one I don't have listed here was the Flexitarian diet. That was the third runner-up in that vote. So the Flexitarian is the idea of choosing more meat alternatives, so choosing more plant-based foods, trying to cut back on the meats because of the saturated fat content. I'm a really huge supporter of the library system. I believe in it a lot. I'm very familiar with this RCL system in particular. So I know for a fact that we have tons of recipe books available on the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, and also the Flexitarian diet. So for inspiration as far as preparing meals, choosing foods in the grocery store, you can always access those books here, or resources online. If you're typing in those diet names, you'll come up with a lot of information as well.